Hi everyone, this is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos, and today we're up to, or down to, the number 2 game in the 2007 U.S. Chess League season's Game of the Year competition. Alright, big mouthful there. This is from the semifinal match between Dallas, who ended up winning not only the match, but also the championship for the season, and Miami. And white in this game was Miami's player, Julio Becerra, strong grandmaster, I believe originally from Cuba, and black is Becerra-Boskovic. And while Boskovic was the underdog in this game, he pulled off the upset. Not a huge upset. It's 114 points difference in their USCF ratings. Didn't look up the FIDE ratings, but to win over Becerra, who's been having a great season for the Miami team, and to do so with black is quite impressive. The game wasn't of any real competitive significance in the match because Dallas won 3.5 to 1/2. So only Martinez, who had the third place game, which should have won, I believe, the overall title, managed to hold a draw. So while it was a competitive setting in that it was a semifinal match and it was a little bit of an upset, let's say the peripheral factors around the game weren't really that tremendous in terms of upset or competitive significance. And it also wasn't an especially accurate game. I mean, there are a lot of mistakes, a lot of changes of fortune, as we'll see, with both players sometimes being better, then worse, and often equal. Now, on the flip side, the game is really complicated and quite exciting. And the degree of difficulty that the players had to deal with was substantial. So the errors that were made are certainly entirely forgivable. I mean, there weren't any errors of the sort where you just kind of smack yourself on the forehead afterward and say that you just can't believe you made a move like that. So it was not a bad game from that standpoint at all. So on balance, I mean, I didn't think that it was a game that deserved as high a place as it received. I think I voted it as my 8th place finishing game, with the Martinez game first. To me, I mean, this seemed in a way kind of like a poor man's version of the Bot Nakamura game, where again you had a lot of excitement, you had kind of a back and forth, and ultimately an upset. But it seemed to me that the drama in that game, as well as the kind of David versus Goliath backstory, were a bit more pronounced than they were in this game. So, not to talk this game down. I mean, as you'll see, it's a fascinating struggle, and one where, again, all 3 results were possible throughout most of this game. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look. Becerra had white, and he started with e4, and by transposition, kind of a strange transposition, really, it ends up as a Scheveningen Sicilian. So I'm a little surprised, maybe, by Boskovic's move order. Perhaps he hoped to induce bishop to b5. I don't really know, because it's rare that white players will strive to avoid. Well, okay, I think I understand, but all right, I'll explain in a moment. Okay, so if you go for a straight Scheveningen g4, some people don't like to face this, and perhaps that's what Becerra plays, and what Boskovic hoped to avoid. You can also, of course, try to play to a bishop to e2, Scheveningen via this move order, bishop to e2, then e6. But I don't know that Becerra plays 6 bishop to e2. I mean, bishop to e3, for instance, is the most popular move overall, and perhaps what Becerra would have played. So this is perhaps what Boskovic hoped to achieve by this move order. Okay, so d4 takes, queen to c7, and here, okay, this is also a little bit of an unusual move order. Okay, knight to c3. Trying to figure out why exactly he played this. Okay, if e6, perhaps he was concerned that Becerra would play knight to b5, and then, okay, I mean, all these lines are fine for black. I mean, they're perfectly playable, but this avoids the Scheveningen. On the other hand, Of course, a6 doesn't really make much sense in this move order. While, okay, you could have tried e6 here, d4 takes, knight takes. Okay, again, if knight to c6, knight to b5 is playable, and if a6 here, then, okay, knight to c3 could still get him to a Scheveningen if both sides cooperate, but maybe white would play bishop to d3 through this move order. So Boskovic is being very, very clever, very finesseful, if that's a word, to try to reach his intended aim. On the other hand, after bishop to e3, a6, white still doesn't have to go into a Scheveningen. I mean, he could play both bishop to d3, which would avoid it, and also queen to d2, a so-called English attack against the Taimanov. So knight to f6, long castles, bishop to b4, f3, and so on. I mean, this is very, very popular. But perhaps out of all of the ways of avoiding the Scheveningen, Boskovic disliked this one the least. Okay, well, in any case, after a6, Becerra played bishop to e2, and after a few more moves, they at last reached a main line of the 6 bishop to e2 Scheveningen, albeit by an unusual move order. Okay, so white played king h1, and all of the following moves have been played many hundreds of times. Alright, we can stop here for just a moment. You can see, of course, that white is building up for a kingside attack, while black, which is very common to this kind of knight or Scheveningen hybrid, is pressuring the pawn on e4. Of course, he can't take the pawn on e4 because queen g7 mate would be the rather forceful punishment for knight takes e4. But still, black's goal is to pressure this pawn and either tie white down to its defense or force its move. And if it goes forward, then the bishop on d4 has its diagonal eliminated, basically, while the bishop on b7 has its diagonal extended. So along those lines, black played bishop to c6. And the idea, or one of the ideas, is to play queen to b7, hitting the pawn, and also preparing b4, sometimes with a5 as a further preliminary. All right, now here the main move is rook a to e1, and after queen b7, bishop d3, we have a position where white either has to accede to the draw with knight c3, queen b4, and so on. Note that black can't take the pawn on b2, because then he loses a piece. Knight to d5, and okay, if queen to b7, then can simply take on f6 on account of this pin, or if queen takes d4, then white gets a 2-for-1 special on black's minor pieces, like this. Now actually there's maybe a question whether this knight gets trapped, so I suppose I should have thought about that first before I made this claim, but I think it escapes, perhaps. Okay, so e5, if pawn takes, knight takes, that's nothing. If knight goes to d7, maybe queen f3, but maybe not. Maybe then d5. So this could be interesting. Let's try knight to d5 anyway. Most natural move. Now, okay, white escapes. Queen h4, h6 or g6, knight to e7. So it looks like white wins a piece. Maybe I shouldn't be 100% about that, but I think that's correct. Okay, but as I said, queen to b4 would simply repeat. Alright, so white plays e5 here if he wants to try to continue the game. Knight h5. And the position we're heading to is one that has occurred on a number of occasions. Black's pieces are all pretty good. The knight on g7, while it looks bad, actually helps both for defensive purposes, and the knight isn't stuck there. It can come to f5, which isn't a bad square either. So white perhaps has a little pull here, but it's a playable position for black. And yeah, bishop to b5 has been played here with, at least in one game, black succeeded in drawing, and black has also played bishop to d5 as well. So, all right, this is all playable here, and as I said, relatively speaking, a main line. But instead of rook a to e1, Becerra chose bishop to d3, and this is playable and has been played. After queen to b7, rook a to e1 would transpose, but black is given an extra option here, and it's to play e5, which is a standard little trick in the bishop to e2 scavening. And the point being that f takes e5 doesn't just win a piece, or win, well, looks like it's just going to win big material, because if d takes e5, bishop takes e5, and white does win a piece, because he's not only attacking the queen, but has this double attack on the knight. Black's queen could go to d8. So, okay, so it's not winning a piece yet. But after queen to d8, rook a to d1, black is under tremendous pressure here. And he's already out a pawn, if nothing else. And he has to worry about things like bishop f6, followed by e5 with the idea of bishop h7 and rook d8. Maybe black can survive just a pawn down here. I kind of doubt it, but in any case, it's nothing that black should want. And also, if he moves the knight away, that's no good. I mean, white plays e takes d6, and that might be threatening mate on g7 as well. But black has this move, knight h5. And here everything is okay. Because the point is that white has no way of maintaining his defense of the e5 pawn, and even though he can attack the black knight with either a queen to h3, which is the main move here, or queen to f3, which is also relatively common, in either case, black just responds with d takes e5 and counterattacks the bishop on d4. So black is fine here. I mean, both sides are okay. I mean, it's just a playable variation, but the point is that black is not in any serious danger. All right, well, here Becerra played a move that was almost a novelty, queen to e3. So it was played once before in a comparatively low-rated game, and okay, that game also saw d takes e5. And then here, in the earlier game, white played bishop to c5, and I don't recall the result of it, but in any case, white has nothing special here. Becerra played a little finesse, played bishop to b6, which is the novelty, and only after queen to b8, then bishop to c5. So he at least drove the black queen to a slightly inferior location first, though it's not really clear that this idea gives white very much in any case. Perhaps a better move, instead of bishop to c5, was knight to d5, with the point that, okay, the knight is very well placed on d5. It also prevents black's knight from coming to the f4 square. And, okay, of course, black can capture. But then white has a passed d-pawn. Okay, both sides end up with interesting majorities. I mean, black can strive to play f5 at some point, while white would like to build up with b3 and c4. White's got the bishop pair. On the other hand, it's not maybe the greatest bishop pair in all of chess history. So, in any case, I mean, it's just a very interesting and, again, imbalanced position. One possible continuation might be something like knight to f4, threatening both the pawn and the bishop, bishop to e4, and now f5. Oh, also notice, of course, that white can't play rook takes f4 because e takes f4, queen e7, queen b6. So bishop e4, f5, and this is just a very, very dynamic position. So who knows what will happen in these variations. Okay, I don't know that bishop to e4 is the best response. Maybe c. Well, I can't play c4 because knight d3 and queen b6. So it's just an interesting and complicated position. Okay. So as I said, knight to d5 I think is the better move, and the point is that, or one point is that while white avoids it for some time, it seems that there really isn't any way for white to generate any momentum in the position, in this not the position, this exact position only, but in this sort of position, in the given the structure of the board as it is now, without there really being too many pawn breaks of use, and white's bishop on d3 having very little play. Only with knight to d5 will white's pieces really have room to breathe and to start finding new avenues to pursue the initiative. And it's going to take white a few moves before he comes to the same conclusion, but he ends up drawing that conclusion. So he might as well have played it here. Alright, bishop to c5 occurred, exchanged, now rook to c8, threatening bishop takes e4. Queen retreats, hits the pawn on f7. Black brings his queen back. So, as we see, maybe Becerra's bishop to b6 had that slightly useful point of driving black's queen to the inferior position. So maybe it gave white a tempo at some point. Alright, and now here again, maybe knight to d5 is the better choice, but once again he chose not to do it and played knight to e2. This also keeps the black knight off of f4, but the knight on e2 is really just very poorly posted, and the bishop on d3 as well has become, for the moment, a fine member of white's c2, e4 pawn structure. Okay, so now black plays queen to e7, is maybe even a tiny bit better in the position. White plays queen to e3, which is a nice little centralizing move. Bishop to d7. I don't know if that's the best move, but it has a good idea in mind, which is to bring this rook to c6 when it'll help defend along the 6th rank. Rook f2, rook c6. Then also with rook f2 we see another point of queen e3, so it's not just a useful centralization, but it clears f2 for white's double rooks. Okay, black played rook to c6 as advertised, and now white realized finally that he simply can't make do without knight to d5. So knight c3, knight f4, and knight to d5, after all. Okay, and now the position quickly becomes very, very interesting and imbalanced. So we go from this really kind of static and dull structure to one where both sides are fighting for the initiative. So takes, rook d6, and now b3. So it's important to note that black can't play rook takes d5. It can take 5 seconds and figure out why, and it's kind of a multiple choice question, really. After rook takes d5, white has not only bishop to e4, okay, actually 3 reasons. Okay, so the Humus algorithm here just pointed a third one. So there's bishop e4, there's bishop takes h7, with the idea that if he doesn't take, then the bishop goes back to e4, and if he does take, then queen to e4. And then the best move, the best answer is simply queen to e4, threatening not just the rook, but more importantly, mate in 2. So let's say bishop e6, and there's mate. Okay, black could play, let's say queen d6, or maybe queen c5. Alright, that's a better move there. But, I don't know, this still doesn't look very appealing, as after rook a to f1, white threatens rook f7 followed by queen to g8, which is mate in 3. He threatens simply queen h8 check, and queen takes a8, and he threatens the original bishop to e4. So anyway, the point is that rook takes d5 is just an atrociously bad move. Alright, so black can't play it, but then that means that white now has time to build up with c4, and then he's going to have this very dynamic pawn duo that black has to worry about. Black is a quick study, though, and realizes, hey, if white can do that, so can I, and he plays g6. Alright, so now c4, f5. And here we have a very sharp but dynamically equal position. And it's just a matter of who plays better here that's going to determine who wins, because both sides have their trumps, and both sides are about equally well prepared to meet the opponent's duo as well. Alright, white played rook to d1, and this prepares a clever little tactical idea, and you might again want to stop the recording at this point and see if you can figure out what exactly it is that white is up to with this rook to d1 move. I mean, okay, it has the generic purpose of simply defending the d5 pawn, but there's a neat little tactical idea too. Alright, well, while you're thinking about it, or perhaps you already have thought about it, let's go on, and I'll point out that black has 2 moves. So there's the move he played, rook to e8, which I think is quite logical and good. Getting his rook, first of all, where it's no longer on this unprotected a8 square, so there's no more diagonal tricks with the rooks getting skewered. Of course, it also helps to support the e-pawn, so again, it's kind of copycat. White played rook to d1, black plays rook to e8. Anything you can do, I can do better. But there was an alternative that deserved consideration, and that was simply the immediate pawn push of e4, not just as a potential tempo gainer and just advancing, but as a clearance move too, giving the black queen the excellent e5 square, or at least potentially giving the queen that square. And now here, white too has a pair of reasonable choices. Okay, one is to play rook f to d2. Of course, black can't take the bishop, and so this is putting as much lumber in support of the d5 pawn as possible to make c5 possible. All right, so let's say rook to f6, hitting the a3 pawn if nothing else. And now if c5, we'll see the if nothing else part, which is a something else, f4. So here comes black, white plays c5, black plays f4. So again the copycat, and then one further little bit of copycatism, queen e4. There goes one of white's pawns, one of black's pawns. So black returns the favor. And here black is maybe even a little bit better. So c5 is premature. You should probably play bishop to b1. Rook e8, preparing f4, d6, queen e5, rook d5, and now trading off the queens. And this position is pretty good for black. So it's still probably roughly within the bounds of equality, but because white's pawns are, at least for the moment, disconnected, and the bishop on d7 is a very good blockader, it's perhaps a smidgen better. On the other hand, it's easier, I would say, for white's king to help out with the defense of black's passed pawn. And of course, I should also point out that black only has one passed pawn at the moment, not two. So roughly equal, maybe black is a tiny bit better. All right, well, I mentioned that after e4, going back a few moves, white has two possibilities. And here we see the second possibility, and this is the tactic that I was challenging you to find a couple of minutes ago. c5. So, of course, this is very desirable. The only problem is that it seems to drop the pawn. But after rook takes d5, white has bishop to c4. So bc, rook d5, white's won the exchange. On the other hand, black has two pawns for this after bishop e6, rook d6, c takes b3. And so the position is quite unclear, and again, approximately equal, but a very dynamic equality. Another possibility, instead of rook to d6, just to mention, is b takes c4, and if black does grab the exchange, then, as very unexpectedly, the c and d pawn duo has been resurrected, and again, it's anyone's game here. Okay, so going back to the game here after rook to d1, Boskovic did not play e4, but played the immediate rook to e8. And now white utilized the tactic that we just saw a moment ago, c5. Rook takes d5, bishop c4, bc, rook d5, c to b3. Okay, so no preliminary bishop to e6 this time, because the e5 pawn would hang. So can't do that, but c takes b3 is fine. And now here, if queen takes b3, bishop to e6 would happen. All right, and now, of course, rook takes e5 would just be a blunder. Bishop takes b3, and black's a piece up. All right. So rook f to d2 was played, which is certainly sensible, bringing the poorly placed rook right into the heart of the action. And now black plays a good move, bishop to c6. Of course, saving his bishop from capture, attacking white's rook, and blockading the c5 pawn, and putting the bishop on a great diagonal. So very useful. White plays rook to d6, and this is also useful, saving the rook, attacking the bishop, and attacking the g6 pawn. And we'll see that this is also of significance. Now black plays queen to b7, protecting, supporting the b pawn, and of course putting pressure on this long diagonal as well. So all these moves are very nice. They're all multi-purpose. And here white has a fundamental choice. Now the move played in the game was queen to c3, and this is not an objectionable move at all. I think white's still equal here. But he could have probably forced a quick draw with queen to g5. Now I'm sure he didn't want to draw, both because he was the higher rated player, and is also, I don't remember if I watched the match live, but we're fairly far into this game, and it could be that he already saw that his team was in big trouble. So there's also the factor that he probably had to play for a win just to meet the needs of the team. So while queen of g5 is good for a draw, it's not good for anything more. So let me show how. Basically, the point is that black has to be a little bit careful. I think rook f8 is probably the best move, but now the rook sacrifice achieves a draw. So we can just repeat. If black tries for a win with queen of g7, this can only get him in trouble, but objectively it's still a draw here. So queen c6, e4, queen d5, and let's make a few more moves. Rook e8 is important, because, I mean, if black really doesn't do anything, then rook d6, rook h6 could prove hugely problematic for black. So rook e8 is well timed. And now e3. Okay, so here white has to be a little bit careful. But things are still very interesting. And actually, here we have something kind of amusing as far as this recording goes. So queen h8, and okay, the simple draw is just queen of g8, queen f6, queen f7. But after king to e7, queen to h6, black has to be careful, because now, for one thing, queen to d6 mate is threatened. And after queen f8, all of a sudden it looks like black is in big trouble. If he plays king to f7, then, if nothing else, well, both rook to d7 and queen takes f5 look really promising. All right, so queen to f6 looks forced, but then rook to d7 just wins the queen. And all right, so when I do these shows, I mean, I'll typically try to analyze the game myself, and then I'll run a computer check to see if I missed anything really big, either in my annotations, well, either that I got something wrong or that I simply overlooked something. And so when I was doing the my prep for this, the computer just said, okay, rook d7 winning, and all right, so that was the end of that line. But then when I was recording this the first time, I went through this and I entered, okay, of course, king d7, queen f6, and I realized, well, okay, e2, this is kind of interesting. And then I spent probably 5-10 minutes trying to find a win for white, and I couldn't do it. It was just driving me crazy. And finally I decided, all right, this has gone on too long, and I don't want to look too incompetent here either when I'm doing the show. So I just trashed that recording and try to find some way to win. I mean, so I really gave it a good effort when I was looking, when I was doing the previous recording. So I looked at queen f5, I looked at queen d6. I found ways to win one pawn or another, found all kinds of neat tricks, but one try would let something else fall and drove me crazy. So then as I said, I stopped the recording and flipped on the computer, and it couldn't win. So it's ridiculous. So it was beyond its horizon from this position to just realize that black equalizes, that there's no way for white to win this. Because the point is, okay, I mean, just the very simple point is that it's not too hard for white to blockade this pawn on e1, but once he does that, then there's b2, and he's just a move too late. Let's say the white queen is on e1, black plays b2, king g1, and then b1 queen, and okay, that just wins for black. So white has to get perpetual earlier, and there's just no way for him to quite get everything he needs in the position to get the win. All right, but we'll see. I mean, white can at least give it a good run here. So queen a6, and there are a few places where black has to find only moves. All right, so here, for example, it's key that black's king goes to f7. I mean, if he sticks around, then okay, let me see if I remember how this worked. I'm not even going to try. I'm not going to go into the same thing. But king d7, this time I believe loses, thanks to there not being an a6 pawn. It means that there's some lines where white has played queen c6, has played c6 check, and then has queen to b5 and then queen to b7 mate. So with no a6 pawn, there's not going to be, or there will be queen to b5 in some lines. So black can't let his king get trapped on the queen side. So king e7, queen d6, king f7. And although white has even managed to win the f pawn too, he's too late to have any wins. So anyway, this just goes to show that black is drawing in basically every variation. It doesn't even need to be that careful. All right, but on the other hand, I mean, white is never in danger here either after queen to g5. Okay, well, as I said, Becerra played queen to c3, which keeps more tension in the position. Though, if black were to play queen to b5 here, threatening mate on f1, king g1, a5, it doesn't really seem that white has anything better than rook to d8, and this is almost 100% likely to result in another perpetual check draw. Okay, this didn't happen, however. Black played f4, and this certainly looks quite reasonable as well. Among other points, the obvious idea is just to play f3 and try to pry open white's king. All right, Becerra played rook to d8, and here Boskovic makes just a serious error. Okay, the move he played, so really he needs to just kind of hold the position, but instead he plays bishop takes g2 check. And this is a natural temptation. So he grabs a pawn. Of course, white can't capture the bishop because of rook takes d8, but black is giving away a tempo or two here, and this is going to prove more than his position can bear. So after queen takes e5, white is at least clearly better and maybe just winning really with best play. All right, now rook takes d8 is not really playable. Let's see if I can quickly figure out why. Rook takes d8, rook takes d8, king f7. The most obvious move here for white seems to be rook to h8, and yeah, I mean, it looks like that's just pretty simple. Okay, so queen f7 is really pretty much forced here, and okay, now white already has one win here with rook takes e8. So rook e8, and now, okay, if bishop takes e8, rook to d8, black has to play king f8, and now simply c6 is winning. Okay, so there's really no good defense here. It's at the advance of this pawn. Okay, going back here, queen takes e8 is a little bit more resilient, but not much. Queen takes, and now a good move here, rook to d4. So the threat is to play rook to b4, and if this pawn has to be protected by the bishop, then black has no hope, because white will push the c pawn, force black's bishop to respond to that, and if white can trade off the bishop, the b pawn for the c pawn, most of the time it's an easy win. And he's also picking up the f4 pawn too. All right, so here a5 is a good move. But rook f4, say bishop c6, bishop f2, bishop e4, rook to b2. Okay, and now here notice that black can't play bishop c2, which would be nice, gift wrapping the white rook, but c6 and the bishop has to retreat. So a4, king f2, king e3. But you can gift wrap again, the king is close enough, but after king d4, white's king is too strong, and he'll be able to win the a4 pawn for free, because black's king has to retreat to deal with the c pawn. And actually, I wonder if this is going to be another horizon effect position. I hope I didn't just give up again too quickly here for black. Oh boy. So let's see. So if g5, all right, king b5, king d7. Okay. If king b6, king c8 is nothing special. Well, let's see if we can just do this. So king a4, g4. All right, are we too slow? Yeah, we're too slow here. Okay, well, this is actually interesting. Okay, is there any kind of ready maneuver? Let's see. So g4. Maybe we can play king b5 instead. Yeah, this isn't going to work. Okay, so yeah, I mean the idea is to try to bring the king back around, but that's too slow. And also, I assume a4 is going to be too slow. But we'll see. Maybe not. Maybe this is the royal road here. All right, might as well take h3. Yeah, no, it doesn't quite work. So black unfortunately covers the queening square and wins. Okay, actually, yeah, there's nothing to be gained by playing a6 straight away. All right, well, this is interesting. Maybe I'm missing something. So it's kind of a neat idea, but seems we're moved too slow. All right, of course, white's king can go over to the king side, but that doesn't seem even remotely promising. All right, well, so it looks like I've refuted another bit of computer analysis here. So, of course, I should have refuted it before I did this, before I recorded, but all right, so this is interesting. So maybe if there is a win here, maybe it's going to require some further finesse. I mean, maybe white has to play something like a4, but oh no, that's just terrible. Bishop c2 immediately. c6, b2, yeah, okay. So rook b2 is forced here. All right, well, so maybe this isn't quite an easy win. I mean, maybe black has a miracle save here. I doubt it, but it's at least possible. All right, well, in any case, in the game, we have king f2. All right, so after king f2, a5, and okay, here for sure there's a win for white with rook 2 to d6. So this time we're not winning an endgame. We're going to try to give mate if we can. Now, actually, I think a couple of times it does get back to the ending, but only clearly winning ones. All right, so for example, if b2, rook e8, and now if queen e8 takes, rook b6, and this time the b2 pawn just immediately falls, so there's no danger. If bishop takes e8, then rook to b6, and rook takes b2, and okay, white's king is a little exposed, but not too badly. I mean, there's no real damage to be done in the light squares, and all of the dark squares in the second rank are covered. And of course, black has a king of his own that is in less than fully appealing regalia. All right, so b2 is not looking successful. If bishop to b5, then once again white goes exchanging, and this just wins. Okay, of course, queen g8, rook takes e8 wins everything, and here, because white's king is now on a very safe square, well, in part for that reason, white just wins big material here in the game. All right, so going back once more, after rook e8, queen takes e8, takes, rook here, and again, this time white's rook gets to the the b file, and it doesn't get stuck on the horrible b2 square. So a4, c6, okay, and this time it's all clear. White wins the bishop, and black can't put up any further resistance. So after a5, rook 2 to d6 would have been a pretty straightforward win. All right, instead Becerra made a serious error here, queen to b8. Now it looks like a logical move, but it's easy to underestimate just how important and how powerful white's queen was on the e5 square. I mean, it was really a dominant piece. So, although it's nice to have this pressure on the 8th rank, as we'll see, black's king actually now just steps off the 8th rank, and one of white's major advantages in the position will now just disappear. So he traded, king to g7, and black's king is at least no worse than it was before, and probably a little bit safer. And the coordination of white's pieces has been lost a little bit. Okay, so queen e5, king h6, rook d3. So after all of that, white ends up having to kind of regroup. So the queen goes back to e5, the rook ends up back off of the 8th rank, and but here, I mean, as opposed to other positions where black's bishop was stuck on e8, and the white pawn was free to go to c6. I mean, here, black, okay, he does have to deal with the rook h3 threat, but that aside, he's not in too bad a shape. So bishop to d7 covers h3, and here white missed, I think, his last chance for an advantage. Okay, so c6, and he's still better. And it's a little bit surprising that he didn't make this move, since he had a reasonable amount of time. I mean, I think at least, I think about 5, 6, 7 minutes, something like that at this point. So it's obvious that black can't take, and it's also obvious that pushing this pawn is useful for white. So that's the reason why I'm kind of surprised that it didn't get played. Okay, so bishop to c8, rook f3. The idea, of course, of just taking the pawn. Black could play g5, but then h4 would prove rather annoying. So b2, queen b2, queen a7, and now queen c5. So here black has managed to activate his queen and simultaneously take white's queen out of play. All right, now here if queen to d2, g5, h4, and it looks like black is actually equal here. So queen c6 takes, queen f4, bishop to b7, and there's no real way for white to exploit the position of black's king. So this, for example, is just a perpetual check, and with the rook pinned and going to be captured at the first opportunity, white really has no way of augmenting the pressure against the black king. Okay, instead of queen to d2, though, rook takes f4 does keep some advantage for white. So queen c6, and although black has a pawn for the exchange, and his bishop is pretty good, still white has, I think, sufficient control over the dark squares to have realistic hopes of a win. I don't know that his winning chances are better than black's drawing chances, but certainly he can press for the foreseeable future. Okay, so that's what would have happened, or could have happened after the move c6. Instead, white played a4, and now after bishop to g4, the position is, I think, again, equal. Certainly white has no advantage any longer. White's king is, thanks to the bishop and pawn, which make a very nice duo here, is in a bit of a net. I mean, you can see they're covering all of these squares here. The b3 pawn is still alive and kicking. The f pawn could turn into a passed pawn of a meaningful sort at some point. And so the position is now really unclear. And here, on the next two moves, which weren't especially accurate, I mean, they weren't especially bad either, but in other words, they weren't of such precision that serious time usage was really ideal. After these two moves, queen d4 and queen to b2, or sorry, rook to d2, now Becerra is down to about 1 minute and 53 at this point. And they have 30-second increments after each move, but still, that's fairly low. I believe Boskovic was at around 5 minutes, and that's about how much time he maintained through the end of the game. Okay, well now bishop to h3, and all of a sudden it's really black who's making the threats here. Now the idea is to play queen g4 and queen g2, and okay, if black could magically play queen to g2 here, it'd be mate next move, king e1, queen f1. So also, instead of queen to g2, there are some positions where he plays queen to h4, and then you have both the queen and bishop operating in a beautiful complementary fashion, where one is controlling light squares, and the other one's controlling the dark squares, and white's king is just not controlling anything at all. It's just in grave danger. Okay, here Becerra plays king e1, g5, king f2, king h5. And if Becerra just keeps making these temporizing moves, black will keep advancing on the king side, and then not only will there be attacking prospects, but more passed pawns running down white's throat. So white springs into action here with c6. Okay, queen g4, threatening mate in 2. Now this is a little bit of a double-edged move, though. So while it introduces a new threat, it lets the white queen reach the very good e4 square. In fact, white's threatening mate in 1 with queen takes h7. Additionally, it covers f3, g2, and well, okay, that's enough. And also maybe e8 in some cases too. Okay, black plays queen to h4, both creating a flight square for his king, and of course also putting white's king in check. King e2, bishop g4 check, king d3. Black again has to be careful. Queen h7 mate is still threatened. Queen h3, king d4, and bishop to f5. And now the position is really radically transformed the last few moves. All of a sudden, the white king is out of the box, and on the other hand, the white king is out of the box. And what do I mean by this? Well, in the one case, the white king is now no longer in any real danger of getting mated. It's very, very difficult to mate a king in the open board with just two pieces, especially when it's a queen and a bishop. A queen and a rook, it's much more possible, but the queen and the bishop, it's very, very difficult to achieve. So white's king is actually comparatively safe where it is at this point. On the other hand, the one advantage for white of having his king back around f2 was that it made it more difficult for the f-pawn to advance. So as we'll see, new factors come into play here. All right, white played queen to e2, and after f3, played queen to e8 check. Okay, so both players, I would say, have made some small inaccuracies since white missed his last big opportunity on on move 45 when he didn't play c6. Right, so if he played c6, still had some chances. Not any clear-cut win, but still reasonable prospects for, well, to play for a win, let's say. So after a4, through this position here with bishop to g6, 12 moves later, the play was all very plausible. I mean, again, maybe micro inaccuracies, but nothing serious. But here, in a single move, Becerra just loses the game. And it's not hard to do in a position like this. I mean, perhaps the amazing thing is that neither he nor Boskovic managed to lose the game earlier in some one-move shot. But in any case, with this next move, Becerra does just outright lose the game. He plays queen to d7. Now, he needed to play queen to e3, keeping an eye on both of these black passers. So both the f-pawn and the b-pawn are still under good control. And white can either choose maybe to come back to c3 to keep the b-pawn well covered, or perhaps he might go for a little trip here to c5, hoping to support the c6 pawn, maybe to grab the a5 pawn. Okay, these are all very interesting possibilities, and one could spend a great deal of time analyzing them, but we're not going to right now. So instead, we're going to take a look at the choice that Becerra made. And at first glance, this looks pretty logical. Queen to d7 hits the black queen, which can't take because then c takes d7, and the pawn promotes. And it also, with tempo, seems to allow c7 to happen next move when, okay, the c pawn is just going to promote. So this looks terrific. What he missed, though, is that after queen to h4 check, king c3, f2, all of a sudden, there's no way for white to prevent the pawn from promoting. I mean, short of just giving up the rook for it. The queen can't go to f7. It can't go to f5. It can't go to d3. And what else is there? There aren't any checks. If there's no c6 pawn, he could go to b5, but of course the pawn's in the way. So and there's no counterattack. And if he tries c7, then he just gets mated. f1 queen, c8 queen, and now there are numerous mates, one of which is queen b4, and then queen to b1. So after f2, the game is in effect over. I mean, of course, white can play a few more moves, but it's just lost here. So he plays rook to d1, and here Boskovic proved that while it's difficult to mate a king in the open board, it's not impossible. And with the sneaky b2, he threatens to play queen to b4 mate. So kind of a neat little idea. The second point is that if white just takes and seems to say thank you, then queen to b4 check. Okay, again, white has to be careful. If king to a1, queen to a3 is mate, or if king to c1, queen to c3 is mate. So king a2, queen c4 check. He can play queen takes a4 as well. King to b2, queen to e2, king a3, queen takes, and now if white tries to promote his own pawn, he's going to get mated, or I think lose the queen. Queen c1, Right, okay, if king a2, it's a forced mate, check. And okay, if you go this way, then you've got this kind of mate. If king to b3, then queen c2, and queen a2 is mate. Alright, so after queen to c1, king to b3, but now bishop c2 check. And either he goes back into the box with king a2 and gets mated with queen b1 and then queen to b3, or he goes to the c file, and in those cases, just bishop to f5 discovers check, and of course black takes the queen. Alright, so that's what happens on c7 here. And if white plays king to b3 to escape the mating tricks, then black just makes some normal moves. And the white king is still in trouble, and white can't promote, because if c5, c7 for example, then queen at e2 wins the queen. So if king c6, bishop e4 check, and the king has to leave the protection of the queen on d7, and likewise king e6, bishop f5 wins the queen, the white queen. Alright, so all this to say that after b2, king takes b2 doesn't save the day. So we tried rook to d4, attacking the queen and blocking its path to b4. But, okay, when you've got two passed pawns on the 7th rank, you can afford to be generous much of the time. So b1 queen, rook takes, king takes, and notice, once again for your amusement, the queen to b4 mate is again threatened. So queen to d4 check, king h5, and here Becerra resigned. Okay, the problem is that, of course, black is threatening to promote, and that'll win on even c7. So let's say if c7, f1 queen, c8 queen, and then here I'm sure there's, yeah, of course, this is just mate in 1. But even if it wasn't mate in 1, it would win the queen. So that's hopeless. And if white prevents it with queen takes f2, queen to b4 is mate. Alright, so a thrilling game, really. I mean, lots of twists and turns, and both sides had their chances, and you've got, kings, both sides kings going on little marches. So really a very, very entertaining game, very exciting, very complicated. Not perfectly played, but for human beings, it's not going to happen anyway. And as you saw from my own some of my computer analysis, the computer didn't know what it was doing either. So at least twice it seems we've refuted its conclusions. So very entertaining. I don't think it probably should have been number 2, but a wonderful game anyway, and a lot of fun to analyze. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time for the number 1 game. Of course, those of you who have been following this know that by default only 1 game is left, but just in case any of you don't know, I won't spoil the surprise. So anyway, I'll see you next week with that number 1 game. Actually, maybe sooner. Maybe we'll post both games this week. At any rate, you'll see it soon. So until next time, take care. Goodbye.